My name is Jonathan Reeves, and for over 30 years I have taught that God was just a human invention. I told my students that faith was a primitive tool, a way the brain found to deal with fear of the unknown. He spoke confidently, logically, with numbers, but there was something I had never been able to explain, the emptiness that remained even when I proved that God did not exist. Have you ever wondered what really happens after the heart stops? Could it really be that everything we are, memories, love, consciousness, disappears like a simple blackout? I believed so. And believe me, I would bet my own life on it. But one day, that's exactly what happened. Before I died, I was professor of neuroscience at the University of Cambridge. He studied the brain as if taking apart a machine, convinced that the soul was nothing more than a set of electrical discharges. For me, prayer was a kind of therapeutic illusion, a spiritual placebo. He spoke about God as if it were an outdated concept, an emotional crutch for those who couldn't bear the weight of reality. I remember a cold winter morning. I was giving a talk about consciousness and brain death. On the screen, an MRI image was projected, showing how the cortex collapses seconds after cardiac arrest. It said, "Here's the proof. When the brain shuts down, everything we are disappears. End of story." The audience took notes. Some looked on in amazement. Others looked uncomfortable. And for a moment, I felt powerful, as if I were the owner of the truth. But the human body is wiser than human pride. Minutes later, I began to feel a sharp pain in my chest, as if someone had reached into my heart and squeezed it. I thought it was anxiety. I took a deep breath and tried to continue. The letters on the projector began to spin. The voices became distant. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. I fell in front of my own students. Perfect irony. The man who explained the end of consciousness was about to prove the opposite. I felt the air escape. I heard screams, running footsteps, and a sound I never forgot, the alarm of life fading away. My body convulsed, my vision narrowed, and everything went white, not dark. White, silent, and it was in that instant, between the last heartbeat and the first silence, that I understood something. Not with the brain, but with something I had never studied. For 14 minutes the doctors said I was clinically dead, but what happened within that time cannot be measured, nor explained. They say that God speaks through silence, but what I heard was something different, something that watched me, not with eyes, but with presence. What if I tell you that, in this space between life and nothingness, something called my name, not a voice, a conscience, a living reminder of everything I denied. For 14 minutes, I ceased to exist, but the scariest thing wasn't what I found beyond life. He was what I found before returning. Because the first test didn't come from heaven, it came from the hallway. The first test didn't come from heaven, it came from the hallway. As the sound of the world faded, something different began to emerge. I didn't feel the weight of my body, but I knew it was there somehow. I can't explain it. It's like trying to describe the wind with your eyes closed. You can't see it, but you can feel it. The noise of machinery and voices mingled in a distant echo. I could hear muffled screams, people running, the metallic sound of something falling to the ground. And then, silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was silence vivo, a silence that seemed to have presence, consciousness, as if silence itself was watching me. I tried to speak, but I realized my voice didn't exist. I tried to move, but there was nothing to move, and yet I saw it, not with the eyes, with something bigger, a type of vision that came from within, that transcended the body and space. And what I saw first left me speechless. I was above my body. Yes, above, floating as if the ground had disappeared. I saw the people around me, the nurses, the doctor trying to restart my heart, the nurse with her hair tied in a bun, sweat running down her face, a student in the corner, in shock, with his hands on his head, a wristwatch that slipped off someone's arm and hit the floor. Everything surreal, so physical, and at the same time, I wasn't part of it. It was the first time I thought, if my mind is off, then who is watching this? I, the convinced atheist, the man who believed that consciousness was merely a product of electrical impulses, was there, conscious, lucid, observing my own body without the slightest sign of brain activity. Fear came soon after. A fear unlike anything I've ever felt. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was the fear of not to exist, to realize that what I had defended my whole life might have been wrong. I tried to touch the doctor, scream, do something, but my hand passed through the air as if it were mist. And then, something happened. The corridor ahead began to glow. It was as if the light was alive, pulsing, calling me, not with words but with an irresistible force, as if to say, "Come." I didn't walk. I was pulled, light, free of all weight. I passed through walls, doors, everything seemed to be made of steam. Time ceased to exist. There were no seconds, no minutes, just a constant flow, as if I were floating inside a conscious dream. With each moment, the light became more intense, but it didn't hurt. It was a soft golden light that seemed to understand me, as if it knew who I was, even without me saying anything. And that scared me, because for the first time, I felt completely known. You know that kind of look that sees everything you are, not just what you show, but what you hide. That was it. A presence that didn't need to ask anything, because it already knew all the answers. I tried to rationalize. I thought, my brain is crashing. This is a hallucination. Cerebral anoxia. Intrusive REM. I repeated the technical words like a mantra, trying to hold on to reason. But reason didn't seem to work there. It was like using a ruler to measure infinity. Then I noticed something strange. With each thought of fear or doubt, the light dimmed. And when I calmed down, she grew, as if that reacted to what I felt. That's when I understood that I was in a space where thought was reality. Everything I thought happened. And that reminded me of something I've always despised. Prayer. I laughed at people who prayed, saying it was a waste of time, that they were talking to a void. But there, I understood that the void responded, not with words, but with energy, with presence. And when that presence completely enveloped me, something inside me collapsed. I felt ashamed, as if all my pride, all my arrogance, all the times I mocked the faith of others, were thrown before me. It was as if God, or whatever, wasn't judging me, just showing me who I really was. And that truth hurt more than dying. I wanted to go back. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the light. I thought about my students, my parents, all the debates in which I defended nothing. And I asked myself, what if nothing never existed? Then I heard, not a voice, but a thought that was not mine. You're not done yet. At that moment I felt a jolt, as if I had been pulled back by an invisible elastic band. The light receded, the air grew heavy again, and the sound of the monitors filled my ears again. But before you open your eyes, I saw something. A small, insignificant detail, but one that would remain engraved in my memory. A pen falling from a tray and rolling slowly until it stops under the metal cart. I had no body, I had no eyes, but I saw. And when I woke up, sweating, with tubes and wires everywhere, that pen was still there. And it was there, in that corridor, in the same place where my mind should have been silent, that the impossible began to make sense. And it was there, in that corridor, in the same place where my mind should have been silent, that the impossible began to make sense. The brightness grew until it swallowed everything around me. I could no longer see walls, people, or the body on the stretcher. It was as if the entire world had dissolved into a single light breathing with me. At first I thought I was losing what was left of my consciousness. But it wasn't disorientation. It was a new awareness, as if every particle of me was awake. There was no sound, but there was rhythm. There was no air, but I felt something sustaining me, a kind of invisible tether that held me together. The light had a temperature. It was warm enough to bring comfort, but there was also a density to it, a force that reminded me of everything I had forgotten. Memories rose and fell like bubbles in a river. Childhood, the first time I laughed at someone praying, the nights I stared at the ceiling of my apartment, believing I was the only one. Each memory was accompanied by a feeling, regret, tenderness, shame, relief. And then for the first time I realized I was not alone. It wasn't a figure before me. It wasn't a voice or a form. It was presence, a presence that seemed to know exactly what I was. She didn't ask me anything, didn't judge me, but her mere existence made me see myself completely. Everything I'd said, everything I'd done, every debate in which I'd humiliated someone, every gesture of arrogance, it all appeared before me, not as punishment, but as a mirror, I tried to push those memories away, but they kept coming back stronger. It was as if the very space around me was breathing with me. Each time I accepted what I saw, the light grew more intense. Each time I resisted, it withdrew, growing cold and distant. I understood without words that this place responded to what I felt. In the midst of this discovery, a soft sound began to vibrate. It wasn't music. It was something between a breath and a chord. I heard it and felt it at the same time, and it seemed to say, "Observe." And then the space changed. I saw a sequence of images, not as linear scenes, but as if each memory were a planet spinning before me. I saw myself as a young man arguing with a friend who had lost his mother. I remembered the sarcasm I'd used when he'd said he believed she could still hear him. And now, there, I realized the pain I'd caused. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I felt his pain as if it were my own. Then I saw a student's face. I remembered she'd cried when she failed. I'd said hastily and proudly that science didn't sympathize with emotions. Now, seeing her face in that light, I understood how much she just wanted to be seen. Every gesture, every word, came back like a wave that washed over me. It was impossible to escape. In the midst of it all, the presence enveloped me again. There was a mixture of truth and tenderness in it that was impossible to describe. I understood something simple and devastating. Nothing of what we are is lost. Not thoughts, not intentions. Every act leaves a mark, not in some distant record, but within us. I thought, if this is eternity, it is not made of time, it is made of consciousness. And this consciousness asked me, without sound, what do you choose to grow within yourself? There was no more direct question. Everything I'd harbored, pride, anger, vanity, was there, pulsing. But there was also a small, shy glow that seemed to spring from every act of kindness I'd ever performed without realizing it. It was as if that space was showing me the seeds I'd planted and saying, "Look what has blossomed." Suddenly, everything felt lighter. The light around me began to swirl, forming a kind of golden horizon. I don't know if it was a portal, a memory, or simply the edge of my perception, but I felt like one step was all it took to cross it completely. There was peace there, a peace so profound I wanted to stay. But the moment I thought this, I felt another force, gentle yet firm, calling me back. It was like a thread connecting two worlds. On one side, warmth and understanding. On the other, the weight of the air, the pain of my body, the sound of machinery. I looked at that horizon one last time and noticed something curious. The presence didn't move away. It just said wordlessly, "Learn. Take what you saw." And then, as if space itself took a deep breath, everything contracted into a point of light, and I began to fall. It wasn't a sudden fall. It was like diving into one's own skin. The sounds of the hospital reappeared, first distant, then loud, cutting through the silence like a blade. The voices returned, the pain too, and I understood it wasn't over yet. I opened my eyes and saw faces above me. Nurses, the doctor, a cold light overhead. Someone was saying my name, but what held me was the feeling that the presence was still with me, quiet, watching, not as if it were outside, but inside me, waiting for me to remember. When I opened my eyes, the white ceiling of the hospital seemed like the most distant sky I had ever seen. The brightness blinded me for a moment. I tried to breathe, but each breath was accompanied by a deep pain, as if my body no longer recognized me. The sound of the machine slowly returned, that bipregula that marked the rhythm of a life regaining ground. Someone was holding my hand, a nurse. She was murmuring something, but I couldn't understand. All I could think was, why am I still here? For a few minutes I lay still, trying to remember. There was a gap of time missing, a 14-minute gap that felt like an eternity, and even without words, I knew something had happened. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory unlike any other, too vivid, too real to dismiss. The doctor entered the room, smiling like someone who had won a war. "Welcome back, Professor." I just looked at him. I wanted to ask what had happened, but my voice wouldn't come out. "You had a cardiac arrest. It was 14 minutes." He paused, as if still surprised to say it. "It's a miracle you're here." Miracle. That word sounded strange to me. I, the teacher who laughed at miracles, was now being called one. As he explained what the doctors had done, my mind was lost in the image of the light. The presence was still with me. It was like a silent echo that mingled with my breathing. I could sense that something had changed, not outside, but inside me. When I was alone, I closed my eyes and tried to relive what I had seen. The light, the sound, the feeling of being known. I expected it to fade like an ordinary dream, but it didn't. On the contrary, it seemed clearer. And then something began to form in my mind, as if someone was drawing words inside me. What you feed grows and measures you. It was a simple phrase, but it carried immense weight. I repeated it over and over. What was I feeding? Pride, vanity, anger, irony. For years I'd taught myself that the brain was the center of everything, that there was nothing beyond what we could measure, and now something I couldn't measure told me that everything I was being measured differently. In the following days, as I recovered, I began to write down what I remembered. I made lists, diagrams, and tried to transform the experience into data. It was my scientific instinct trying to regain control, but the words that came didn't fit into equations. They felt like poetry or prayer. When I returned home, something still haunted me. I would wake in the early hours of the morning with the sensation of someone calling my name, not with sound, but with intent. Some nights, I would feel the same light fill the room, as if reminding me not to forget. I started rereading my old articles. I saw in them the arrogance of someone trying to explain the universe by looking only through a microscope. I began teaching differently. I still talked about synapses, neurons, and biochemistry, but I also told students that there are questions that science does not answer because perhaps they are not questions for science to answer. Some laughed. Others were silent, as if something had touched them, and I understood. It was the same silence that surrounded me in that place of light. One day, a student came to me after class. "Professor, do you believe in the soul?" I was silent for a moment. Before, I would have laughed at the question. Now I just said, "I believe in consciousness, and I think it goes far beyond the brain." She smiled and replied, "So you believe in something?" At that moment, I realized the magnitude of the transformation. It wasn't about religion. It was about recognizing that life is bigger than logic. Time passed. I was invited to speak about my experience, and every time I told what I experienced, I noticed that people fell silent. Some cried, others wrote everything down. I always said, "I don't want you to believe me. I want you to think about what you're feeding inside of you." Because in the end, that's what the phrase meant. Everything we cultivate, love, pride, generosity, contempt, grows within us until it defines us, and perhaps that's what we carry with us when our bodies stop working. One night, while reviewing notes, I found a drawing of a broken brainwave, the line that marked the exact moment of my clinical death. Below it, I silently wrote, "Consciousness does not end at the line, it passes through." I closed the notebook and felt a shiver. The presence was there, discreet, watching. It didn't ask for adoration or explanations. It simply reminded me that I had seen the impossible and returned to tell the story. I looked at the clock and instinctively muttered, "I'm still learning." That night, before I went to sleep, I realized I no longer needed to prove anything. I just needed to listen. The next few days passed as if I were walking between two worlds. The hospital smelled constantly of antiseptic and cold coffee, and every nurse's footstep in the hallway echoed like a reminder that I was still alive. But something inside me no longer fit. At night, when the room fell silent, I relived the 14 minutes that had disappeared from the medical records, the feeling of light, the emptiness that breathed, the phrase that repeated itself, "What you feed grows and measures you." I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a product of lack of oxygen, but the more I analyzed, the more memories surfaced. One image kept coming back, the pen falling from the metal, tray and rolling onto the cart. It was a banal detail, but so clear it unsettled me. I could have sworn I saw it, but rationally I couldn't have seen anything. I was unconscious, my heart stopped, my brain without detectable electrical activity. On the third day of my hospitalization, I asked to speak with the attending physician. When he entered the room, his lab coat wrinkled and his dark circles under his eyes. I began slowly, "Doctor, there's something I saw." He raised his eyebrows. "See?" "Yes. While you were trying to revive me, I noticed something. I saw the lady with her hair tied up. I saw the watch falling. and I saw a pen rolling to a stop under the crash cart. The doctor was silent for a moment. Then he scratched his chin as if searching for an explanation that fits within reason. "You may have heard sounds, constructed an image. It's common." I nodded, but his voice didn't convince me. "And the pen? Did it really fall?" He took a deep breath. "She fell. The nurse almost tripped over her, but you couldn't have seen that." The silence that followed was heavy. He tried to change the subject, asked if I was in pain. I answered mechanically, but my head was spinning. Not because I thought it was a miracle, it was because I had no answer. In the afternoon, when the nurse who attended to me came in to change the IV, I asked her name. "Sarah," he replied. I spoke softly. "Your watch fell on the floor, didn't it? Right after they tried to use the defibrillator." She stopped mid-motion. "How do you know that? I really did drop it." She looked at me as if I'd read her mind. "I thought you were unconscious." She left the room without another word. I stood there, staring at the ceiling, the constant sound of the monitor beside me. For the first time in my life, science seemed small. I spent the next few hours trying to record everything, every detail, every sensation. I created a mental map of the resuscitation room, people's positions, objects, colors. Everything matched what I remembered. I needed data. It was what I'd always known how to do. In the days that followed, I began reading studies on out-of-body experiences, articles on perception under anesthesia, and residual consciousness phenomena. I discovered the work of researchers investigating similar accounts to mine. There were dozens of cases, different people, different contexts, but the same pattern: active consciousness while the body was disconnected. This didn't prove anything, but it couldn't be ignored either. I began to accept that perhaps there was a kind of perception we didn't yet understand, and deep down, the voice of the light, or whatever it was, seemed to repeat, "Learn." I returned to the auditorium where it all began. The same projector, the same chairs. I looked around the space and tried to imagine the body that had fallen there, the man who believed he had all the answers. I walked onto the stage and stood in silence for a few seconds. That silence had a different weight now. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something greater. I grabbed the microphone and said, "I taught for years that consciousness is a product of the brain. Today I'm not so sure. What I saw, what I felt, showed me that perhaps consciousness is where the brain comes from." The audience was silent. No one applauded, no one laughed, and it was perfect. For the first time, I spoke without needing to prove anything. After the lecture, a young man waited for me at the exit. His eyes were full of tears. "Professor, do you think there is something after death?" I looked at him and replied, "I don't know what exists, but I know that nothing is not the answer." He smiled and squeezed my hand, and in that simple gesture I felt the same warmth of light, the same presence, not outside, but among the people. That night, back in my room, I sat at my desk and wrote, "Science observes, consciousness participates. Between the two, there is a bridge. Perhaps this is what we call life." I closed the notebook and stared at the reflection of the lamp in the window. The hospital, the hallway, the distant sound of machines, all were part of a reality that now seemed like just a layer to me. And I, the man who measured brains, was learning to measure silence. In the days that followed, something strange began to happen. They weren't dreams, they weren't hallucinations. It was as if my memory had taken on a life of its own. All I had to do was close my eyes for a few seconds, and the images would appear, clear, vivid, full of sounds and smells. These weren't ordinary memories, they were recreated experiences. At first I thought they were side effects of the medication, but I soon realized there was no pattern. The scenes always appeared during quiet moments when the room was empty and the sound of the monitors mixed with my breathing. The first memory caught me off guard. I was back on a rainy afternoon in my youth, hurrying through the university hallways. A research colleague called out to me, asking for help with an experiment that wasn't working. I remember stopping, looking at her and saying coldly, "If you can't do it alone, maybe you're not fit for science." She fell silent and I continued walking. Now, years later, reliving the scene, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before: her look. It was a look of frustration, of pain, and along with the memory came the feeling she felt, the lump in her throat, the shame, the urge to give up. I felt it all. It was like carrying the weight of a word I never apologized for saying. The scene dissolved, and another took its place. Me, sitting at my father's kitchen table, responding impatiently when he tried to talk about faith. "Do you still believe in these things, Dad? The brain explains everything." I remembered his sad smile, the way he'd lowered his eyes and changed the subject. And now, there, I felt what he felt. The pain of a father who only wanted to share what he loved with his son. A simple yet profound pain. These memories came like waves. Each one showed me a gesture I'd neglected, a kindness I'd denied, an empathy I'd kept to myself. And the more I saw, the more I understood that every small choice left a mark. No word disappeared, they merely echoed within someone. One day, as the sun streamed through the hospital room window, I remembered a moment that, until then, had seemed insignificant. A student had forgotten his class material, and I humiliated him in front of the class. At the time, I thought I was teaching discipline. Now I realized I was only feeding my own ego. I saw his face, saw the way he flinched, and realized the pain I had caused. It was as if time were giving me back everything I had ignored. These images weren't judgmental. No one told me, "You made a mistake." It was just the naked truth, and the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just shows. I began to understand the phrase that echoed from that space of light. What you feed grows and measures you. I harbored pride, impatience, and coldness, and now I saw the size of those seeds within me. But between one memory and the next, small sparks of light also appeared. Simple gestures I'd forgotten. The smile for a nervous student, the day I gave a book to a curious boy, a night when, without realizing it, I hugged someone in need. These gestures shone differently, as if they were living memories. I realized it wasn't just evil that was growing, good was growing too, and perhaps that was what that presence wanted to teach me. Every scene was a mirror, and every mirror showed me who I could have been if I had chosen differently. There was no escape, but somehow it didn't hurt like punishment. It hurt like healing. It was a cleansing kind of pain. In the intervals between one vision and another, I thought about how many times I'd laughed at other people's faith, how I'd used logic as a shield. I realized that deep down, I wasn't mocking God. I was mocking the fear I had of not understanding the meaning of life. As I stared at the ceiling, I thought, what if every person we hurt stays inside us, waiting for us to learn to love better? This thought pierced me like an arrow. For the first time, I felt the urge to apologize, even without knowing to whom. That night, when the hospital lights went out, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I want to learn." And for a brief moment, I felt the same warmth of light enveloping me. Again, no words, no sound, just understanding. And I knew the lesson wasn't over yet. For weeks, I tried to stick to my routine. My body was healing. The tests showed improvement, but my mind still felt like it was caught between two worlds. Sometimes, I would close my eyes and feel the same gentle warmth creeping up my arms, as if a memory of light still pulsed beneath my skin. One night, while the hospital slept, I heard that familiar silence. Not the usual silence, but the same one that had enveloped me before my return, dense, full of presence. The air grew light and the sound of the machines faded until it disappeared. The room became a formless space, and I realized I was there again, in the middle of an immense field, between brightness and shadow. The light in front of me seemed to beckon me. Behind me, a darker outline reminded me of the gravity of the body, the weight of existence. There was no fear, but there was choice. For a moment, everything stopped. I felt I could cross over once and for all, leave behind the world of pain, of unanswered questions. One step was all it took. The warmth was peace, understanding, rest. But at the same time, a small human memory pulsed within me. Faces, voices, the touch of hands that still called me back. I looked at the light and, speechless, asked, "Is this where it ends?" The answer came not as a sound, but as a feeling. A gentle ripple passed through everything around me, and in it was meaning. The end is just where you decide to stop learning. That sentence echoed within me. I realized it wasn't an order, it was a choice. Staying would be peace, but it would also be stagnation. Going back would be pain, but it would be growth. I closed my eyes, and the memories came flooding back. My father, my student's gaze, the nurse who held my hand. Each image pulsed like a tiny pinprick of light, as if reminding me that there was still something to do, something to understand. I felt the presence approaching. It wasn't a figure. It was pure consciousness, a warmth that permeated my thoughts. It didn't push me, it just enveloped me, making it clear that the decision was mine. The space around me began to spin slowly, as if breathing with me. The light ahead opened into a larger circle, and within it was an indescribable calm. On the border between going and staying, a sentence emerged, short, firm, definitive. What you deny still belongs to you. The sentence hung suspended, as if written in the air itself. I repeated it mentally, trying to comprehend. It was simple, but it carried weight. Denying something, faith, love, vulnerability, doesn't make it disappear. It only transforms it into shadow. And I realized it was this shadow that was pulling me back into the world. There were still parts of me that needed to be seen. The light seemed to understand. It moved around me, soft as wind. And for the first time I felt no fear or doubt, only gratitude. I knew what I needed to do. I thought about everything I hadn't yet said, about the people who could still hear what I'd learned. It was as if each memory was a bridge connecting me back to life. I knew that when I opened my eyes, the pain would return, the weight would return, the questions would return. But something inside me whispered that this was how it was meant to be. Before the light faded, I felt the last touch of that presence, not physical, but like an embrace of understanding. It seemed to say, take the memory, not the certainty. And then everything contracted. The field of light shrank to a bright point, and the sound of the hospital returned like distant thunder. The heartbeat, the air, the cold metallic of the machines. I was back. I opened my eyes and felt tears streaming down my face. The nurse rushed to adjust the sensors, but I just whispered, almost voiceless, I chose to return. She didn't understand. She smiled and told me I needed to rest. I just closed my eyes, trying to remember the last sentence I heard. What you deny still belongs to you. I knew she would be with me for a long time. The first breath after returning was harsh, heavy. The air burned my throat. My entire body felt like stone. The doctors called it recovery. I called it re-entry. Each heartbeat was a hammering reminder that I was back. In the early days, the hospital felt like a strange world. People hurried along, voices crossed, alarms blared. I observed everything like someone visiting a familiar place after a long time. There was life there, but also distraction. Faces glued to screens, haste, fatigue. I thought, do they realize they are alive? Each night, when the room grew dark, the echo of the light returned, not in visions, but in sensations. It was as if a silent presence breathed alongside me. I didn't need to understand. I just needed to remember. Coming home was strange. Things were in the same place, but nothing was the same. The wall clock, the smell of coffee, the books stacked on the desk, everything seemed to have meaning. It was as if each object held a story I'd never stopped to hear. I spent hours sitting in the armchair, watching the light stream in through the window. The distant sounds of the street were different now. Everything seemed synchronized, as if every detail were part of something larger. And for the first time, I didn't try to explain. I just observed. When I returned to university, my colleagues greeted me with applause and questions. They wanted medical details, statistics, theories. I gave what I could, but deep down I knew that what happened couldn't be represented in graphs. The truth didn't need to be proven. It needed to be experienced. Restarting classes was another challenge. I entered the room, looked at the attentive faces, and realized how much each person is an invisible universe. Before, I saw students. Now I saw stories. I began teaching differently. I talked about neuroscience, but also about silence, about what happens when thought stops. Some found it strange, others were stuck. One student said, "Professor, you speak as if you had seen something." I just replied, "I saw how much I didn't see." Over time, I began to change small habits. I began to walk slowly, to listen more than I spoke. I would call my father just to hear his voice. I wrote thank you notes to people I had once helped without understanding. Each gesture was an attempt to integrate what I had learned, that what we cultivate within us is never lost. Sometimes during lectures, someone would ask, "Do you believe in life after death?" I smiled and replied, I believe in conscience, and I think it continues, somehow. This answer left room for everyone, for believers and doubters alike. And that's what I wanted, space. I began writing a book, not a scientific treatise, but a diary of insights. I called it Between Silence and Sound. In it, I tried to translate what I learned without imposing meaning. I wrote that perhaps life is like a conversation between two worlds, and that love, whatever it may be, is the language that unites them. One day, as I was leaving the university, a student caught up with me. "Professor, did you really die for 14 minutes? Absent. And what did you see?" I stopped for a moment. I looked at the sky. Blue, ordinary, real. I saw that what we feel is more important than what we taste. He was silent. So was I. Sometimes silence is the answer. That night, I sat down at my desk again. The pen I used to write the first chapter slipped off the table and fell to the floor. I smiled. I picked it up calmly, remembering the hallway, the first fall, the first test. I put it back down and thought, maybe some things fall just to remind us to look down at the ground where we still stand. I took a deep breath. The presence, that living calm, was still with me. I no longer needed to search for it. It was in everything. In the distant sound of laughter, in the smell of rain, in the simple fact of breathing. And that's when I realized returning isn't about going back to a place. It's about waking up to the place we've always been. Life returned, but I was no longer the same. Every sound, every face, every breath, everything felt like part of something bigger. I used to seek proof. Today I seek presence. I learned that perhaps life doesn't require explanations, but rather care. When we look closely, the whole world responds. And if there is something after death, perhaps it's just a reflection of what we choose to feel while alive. Sometimes I close my eyes and still hear that silence. It doesn't scare me anymore. It's the same silence that exists before a hug, before a kind word, before forgiveness. It's the sound of what truly matters. If you're listening to me now, remember this. Don't wait for death to wake up to life. Do it today. Love today. Forgive today. Because time waits for no one, and every second is an invitation that never comes back. Slight pause. Soft. Sound of breathing and heartbeat resuming. If this story touched something inside you, made your heart race, or just made you think, don't leave without leaving your mark here. Write the word in the comments. Survives. To show together that consciousness continues. Leave your like. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it now. Subscribe to Echoes from the Other Side, because every week new stories will make you see life in a different way. It's not just a channel, it's a reminder. A reminder that even when everything seems to end, something always survives.